Welcome to the Table podcast series with Bridget Johnson. Each month, we give you game-changing conversations about K-12 education and leadership. Join us as top educators, field experts, and administrators share actionable strategies to transform your school community. Let's dive in.
Welcome to The Table, the podcast where student-like professionals, educators, and change makers come together to share stories, insights, and ideas for building communities where everyone belongs. I'm your host, Bridget Johnson. Today, I'm excited to welcome Peyten Williams, founder of BowBend Consulting and a former middle school administrator and instructional coach with 16 years in education. Her work equips parents and educators with research-backed tools to raise children who truly know they belong at home and at school. Today, we're talking about what it practically looks like to raise children with a deep sense of belonging and how parents and educators can work together to make that happen. Welcome to the show, Peyten. How are you?
Bridget, thank you so much for having me. I am doing well, and I'm so excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, we're just going to jump right in. So tell us a little bit about your journey, 16 years in education, and now you're running BowBend Consulting. What was the moment when you realized this work needed to exist in the world?
My story is actually a little bit of a funny one. I never actually thought I would leave the classroom or leave the school where I was teaching. I was deeply involved in the school I was working at. I taught for 3 years at a public school. I taught high school English for a little while right out of college. I knew I wanted to be an educator my whole life. That was always something I wanted.
Okay.
And then once I got to Westminster in Atlanta, where I was working, that was actually the school I had attended as a child.
Oh.
And my children went to preschool there and are now there also. And so I had a lot of deep roots there. So I taught there for 13 years, and I was one of the directors of teaching and learning in the middle school, which meant I had the most amazing job. I could go around and see what was happening in everybody's classrooms. I got to do observations and coaching. And then just over the years, it's funny, I had a little bit of a knocking on my heart, I guess, that was like, hey, I've got something different for you. And I was brave enough to take the leap to try something new. And what's been really neat is to be able to connect with other educators like you outside of my normal sphere, and to be able to connect with parents and see just how well what we know about teaching actually translates into parenting, and how important it is for teachers to bridge that gap with parents, and for parents to bridge that gap with teachers. So it really has been neat to see, like, oh yeah, this work is important, and our kids need strong and kind adults in the room who can help them feel like they belong, and to raise thriving kids of character. And that is a goal that everybody wants.
I love it. And so your company name comes from a poem about parenting. For listeners who aren't familiar with it, can you share that metaphor and why it resonated so deeply with you?
Oh, yes. I was a former English teacher, so pretty much anything poetry, writing, I'm all about. But this poem comes from a book called The Prophet by Kahlil Gibran. And the poem is called On Children. And in it, he describes parents as the bow, and children as the arrows, and then God as the archer. And I just think it's such an apt metaphor, because teachers will tell you, and parents will tell you, that a lot of their life they spend learning how to be flexible or how to bend without breaking, and without letting the job break you. And that the better we bend, and maybe the better we bend in the hands of God, or in the hands of good values, or in the hands of good mission, the better we do that, the farther our children can fly. And so that's where the name comes from. And it's such a good reminder to me every day, like, this is a practice, and it's hard, but it's good. It's good work.
It is a practice. And I love that metaphor, bending so that your children can soar. So lovely.
Thank you.
When we talk about children knowing they belong, and there's a lot of conversation about belonging these days. What does that actually mean?
There really is so much work these days. I think what's really cool is a lot of the work is backed up by brain science around, how we're wired and what we really need. If we go back to, Maslow, we got to be safe, right? And
Yeah.
have our basic needs met. But what's really interesting is that belonging and the way that our brain is wired is actually like a really basic need. And the more we learn about students, particularly in the classroom, like we've learned that students can't learn if they don't feel safe
Yeah.
because, right, priority number one. And what makes you feel safe is if you belong and if you're significant. In my parenting work, I've done a lot of work with positive discipline, which is founded on Alfred Adler and Rudolf Dreikер's philosophy of that every human behavior is a movement towards belonging and significance. And so when we think about that as a way to interpret children's behavior too, you start to look at, okay, well, why is this child acting up? Oh, it's because they really don't feel respected, or they don't feel like they belong, or that's a way that they think they're going to get belonging. But it's not really the right way, but it's the only way they know how, and they don't have the skills yet. So when as educators or as parents, we can be that strong and kind adult in the room who sees like, oh, let me interpret this in a way that will help you have belonging. I think what that means is really that the child feels seen, they feel known, they feel accepted, they feel safe, and they know that they matter, which is another key piece of work that's coming out right now from Jennifer Brahaney Wallace in her work called Never Enough.
Okay.
And she's a journalist who went around and interviewed a lot of students from high achieving schools. And so it aligns with a lot of the work of what Sunya Luthar did as well, with Authentic Connections.
Yep.
And it's all just circling around the importance of when the adults can help the children be empowered to belong and know that they matter, the learning happens, the good behavior happens. And what's cool is there are actually like really specific strategies that we can use both at home and in the classroom to foster that belonging.
I love that. And so how is that belonging different for students versus adults, in your
Oh,
opinion?
that's really interesting. Well, adults already have power, right? So like when you're a teacher, you step into the room and you automatically have significance. You have power. And you already feel in a way like you belong because it's your classroom or it's your school. You've been there. Whereas students are almost like the guests coming into your kingdom and you're the host, right? Like if I host people at my house, I already belong, right?
Right.
I'm inviting you in. You're the guest.
Right.
And so I feel like a lot of times students kind of show up as like the guests in the classroom. And the greatest teachers are the ones that are great hosts.
Yes.
And let students feel like, gosh, we are so glad you're here, right? Imagine the experience of a student walking into a classroom and the teacher, it sort of wouldn't matter whether it was you student or other student over here. Some teachers teach like that, right? Where it's like, it actually doesn't matter who shows up in the room. It's more about them than it is
Right.
about their students. And those are the ones that usually have behavior issues. The students don't learn that much. They have a lot of trouble. Whereas when teachers can flip that and say, okay, well, wait a minute, I already belong. I'm already
Right.
important. And when they have that perspective shift, then they can go, oh, well, I have a real opportunity to welcome these kids into my classroom. And the same thing for parents. I think, the difference between what it feels like to belong at home, I feel like a lot of parents, where they actually start to feel that tension is when their kids become teenagers and their teenagers start pushing back and wanting independence and wanting to kind of build their own belonging. And the parents start to feel like, well, wait a minute, you're leaving me out. I don't belong in your life anymore. And right. And there's tension there.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And or when children, littler kids with parents, start to push back against the parents' boundaries, and the parents are like, well, wait a second, this is my home. You are like kind of like the
You're a
less
guest in my home.
you're a guest in my home and you're going to
My
leave.
mother said that several times.
Hopefully 18 years, you're going to be out of here, right? So,
Right.
and that's where a lot of tension comes, right? So parents can feel like they don't belong too, and teachers also, right? Even with colleagues, they can feel like they don't belong. But
Sure.
really, it starts, I think, with power, and adults already have the power.
They already have the power. That's a good point. So what are some of the signs at home or in the classroom that a child doesn't feel like they belong? And what should parents and educators be watching for?
I think one really cool tool that positive discipline uses is called the mistaken goals chart. and you could probably link it if you want to. It's
Mm-hmm.
been a really helpful tool for me in my parenting. And as I run it sort of through my classroom lens, I'm like, oh, wow. So some of the things that they talk about is, sometimes children try to get belonging and significance through power struggles, right? So you have
Yeah.
maybe this student who's like, I'm not doing that assignment,
Mm-hmm.
or I'm gonna kind of talk back a little bit or say stuff under my breath, right? When you start to have that power struggle with a kid in the classroom and also at home, right? When you say,
Yeah.
hey, it's time to put on your jacket, and the kid's like, no. Right? Or they throw the jacket, or a lot of times that power struggle, that kind of shows they either don't feel like they belong or like they're important. And those are like two ends of the same
Yeah.
coin, I guess, right?
Absolutely. For sure.
Um, so you might see things like kind of some revenge or power struggles. You might see annoying behaviors,
Mm.
right? Like calls for attention. So I laughed. There was a kid in one of my classes. I taught middle school boys.
Oh
And for
boy.
whatever reason, they gave us rolly chairs. So this was not a great idea. I had, children falling out of chairs, sliding down
Right.
the room,
Spinning around.
spinning around, just the whole class, right?
Yep.
And there was one kid in particular, and he struggled socially.
Mm.
And I will never forget, just all class, he was rolling in that chair, because he knew that when he did that, I was going to correct him and he would have my attention.
Have some attention. Look at that.
So sometimes you get that like negative attention, right? Or
Yeah.
sometimes you get that positive attention where it's like, look at me, praise me, watch me, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this is also when you see kids at home.
Yep.
Maybe you're I laugh. All parents joke that when, as soon as they pick up the phone, your child
Soon as
knows
you get, yep.
you. Because they just want to be reminded that they belong, right? And so that those calls for attention is another way. There's lots of ways, but those are kind of the two main ones that we see.
That's great. And so do you think belonging is something you can teach, or is it something that has to be felt and experienced?
That's a really great question. I think as we think about helping kids feel belonging, there are definitely strategies to create belonging. One of my very favorite authors is Priya Parker, and she wrote a book called The Art of Gathering, and it's all
Mm-hmm.
about how to be a great host.
Yep.
And what's really cool is she's got very specific strategies about building belonging. When I was in the classroom, I took a lot of those strategies and I used them to help my classroom feel more belonging. And I actually sometimes use them at home, like if we're getting ready for a trip or we're getting ready for a celebration with our family. I use
Mm-hmm.
a lot of those as well to help that. But in terms of whether you can teach a kid to feel belonging, um, I think it's more of a feeling you cultivate
Okay.
with particular skills rather than something you would tell a kid like, hey, here's how you feel like you belong. Although I do think, like always, anything we can do metacognitively, right, with kids to say, hey, belonging is important. And our brains can learn better when we're calm and when we feel like we belong. When do you feel like you belong? When do you feel like you don't belong? What do you do when you don't feel like you belong? That might be the most explicit way you could teach belonging to kids, is
Mm.
to draw their attention to it and do some good questioning.
I like that. And so let's switch gears just a little bit and talk about the role of parents and educators. And so a lot of parents want to raise confident, grounded kids, but they really aren't sure where to start. So what's the most common gap you see between what parents want for their kids and what's actually happening at home?
So, Bridget, this is such a interesting question because my kids are all in kind of that upper elementary middle
Mm.
age. And so I am
Yep.
really living what I saw as a teacher. And it's funny. I feel like, as a teacher, I remember being a teacher before I had kids and then being a teacher after I had kids. And it was a really stark perspective change for me. And
Mm.
it's not that you can't be a great teacher if you don't have kids, but you also have to acknowledge, and this was something I did not do well, but I wish I had been more humble about my lack of ability to empathize in that way.
Got it. Yeah.
And so I think that's one important piece. But I also think for teachers, I think they sometimes forget, and I forgot, how busy families are outside of school. Like they are working so hard,
Yeah.
um, especially parents at independent schools, because right, you're already in a rat race, and the kid is in a rat race at school where they're comparing themselves to their peers, and there's a lot of high achievement, and there's amazing opportunities, but that also comes with trade-offs, right?
Yep.
And I think we sometimes forget that parents, right, when we are teaching their kids, parents are also doing so much outside of school, whether it's
Sure.
like driving them to sports practice or music practice or getting extra tutoring or helping their child with the executive function skills that, maybe teachers just sort of expect that they have. I think there's a lot more that goes on at home than we are often aware of. And so I do think that piece is a really important compassion piece that educators
Mhm.
could just add on to their lens when they start to interact with families or kids who are having issues, and use that as a place of curiosity. Hey, I'm
Yes.
seeing Peyton struggle in class. She's not doing her homework. Instead of assuming, oh, well, they're just bad parents who don't care.
Right.
Like, can you tell me a little bit about what happens after school? Like, what's your homework like?
Yeah.
What's home life like? Because I think a lot of us would be surprised that kids who may seem lazy really just have a lot going on.
A lot going on. And so that's a great segue into my next question, because you talked about what educators should understand more about what parents are carrying. But you spent 16 years as a teacher and administrator. What do you wish more parents understood about what teachers are navigating every day?
Mm. So, yes, I mean, there are so many things. I laugh. The year after I left the classroom, a lot of my parent friends would come to me and be like, hey, am I interpreting this right? Am I interpreting this email from this teacher right? And I think parents should just know that they really don't have all the context, right? That when your kid comes home with a 75 on a, Spanish quiz, all right, there's a lot that went on in the classroom.
Right.
And I think sometimes parents assume a couple things. They assume that the teacher doesn't like my kid, the teacher isn't a good teacher, or they're not teaching my kid well. The teacher, like sometimes the kids will come home and say, well, they never taught us this, right? Or
Right.
whatever. And it's like, well, let's just go ahead and default to the assumption, right, as a parent, that the teacher is a professional. They know what they're doing. They've taught a lot of kids. They have a plan. They don't want your child to fail. While they may not love your child, because you can't love every child, they know your child and they
Hmm.
want your child's success. And so I think if parents start with those assumptions, then they can again go in with that curiosity and say, okay, like, is this a pattern? Is this something, they can go in and ask rather than demand? And that's something that builds parent and teacher partnership in a way that I think would be really helpful for all parents and teachers.
Yeah, that parent educator relationship is so important. It's a partnership, right? And so where does that relationship tend to break down? And what does it take to strengthen it, do you think? I think you said it already, but I'm gonna
Well,
let
I do think there's a piece that I think all people, myself included, can get better at.
hmm
And it is receiving feedback. One of my favorite books is Thanks for the Feedback. And it's all about, like, I think the subtitle is even when it's off base, from people you don't like, and it's totally not true. Because a lot of times, right, a lot of times the relationship breaks down when a teacher gives feedback about a parent's most important life person,
Yes.
and they don't hear the feedback well, and they get defensive, right? Or they get angry
hmm
instead of getting curious or seeing it as helpful or seeing it as a learning opportunity, both for them and for their child, right? And then on the flip side, I would say a lot of times schools, particularly administrators, and rightly so, get really defensive when a parent comes and says, "Hey, this has been my experience.
Mm-hmm.
I'm giving some feedback." And I can't tell you the number of times I've heard from parents who say, "I gave this feedback and the school said, well, you're the only one who feels that way."
Mm.
And I will just tell all
Uh-oh.
schools, when one parent is brave enough to give you feedback, they are not the only parent that feels that way. And yes, maybe they are the squeaky wheel and they are annoying, or they may seem off base, but get curious, both sides, about what could be true about that. And then what can you change to make it better, either for them or the next people coming through? And I think that is where, if we start with curiosity and we start with a posture of accepting feedback, that's a linchpin that I think a lot of schools and parents can get a lot better at.
I agree. And curiosity is so important on both sides. And, not making assumptions because, we've already come in. We've got our assumptions ready, we've got a stack of them. We're ready to just kind of throw them out there. And so putting those aside, taking some of the emotion out of it. And it's hard not to be, emotional when you're talking about your child, or it's hard not to be a little bit emotional and defensive when you're talking about the work that you've poured yourself into. And so on both sides, we need to kind of think about how we can kind of take a step back, breathe, and be a little more curious. So I love that you said that.
Thank you.
So, restorative practices and belonging are really connected. And I think that's one of the pieces where we connected on. I'm wrapping up my master's in restorative practices, and that's become a big topic in schools these days. A lot of people are thinking about how to be more restorative in their classrooms. But so for parents and educators who are newer to the concept, how would you define restorative practices, and how does that connect to raising children who feel like they belong?
Oh my gosh, Bridget, it's just such an important, it's such a great shift that I see happening in education. And I hope it happens in homes as much, right? If you think about, we're all human, so we all mess up.
Yeah.
I can't tell you the
Right.
number of times I messed up, right? Like, even as an educator, I messed up so much. I messed up with kids. I messed up with parents. I messed up with colleagues. I
Yeah.
mean, there were so many times when I just did not even like mean things, just dumb things, right?
Yeah.
And so I think on kind of the first level of restorative practice is just an assumption of grace and humility that, like, we're not perfect. I'm not perfect. You're not perfect. But we can love each other well,
Right.
even in our not perfectness. And I really love that schools are adopting that mentality. And so then you start to think about, okay, well, if we're going to love each other well when we mess up, that means that instead of kicking people out or blaming and shaming and, um, basically saying, well, you don't belong anymore. If we think about the way that, like, a lot of times in society, whether it's in social groups or schools or even in businesses, when you mess up, you're out, right? Maybe you get expelled, or maybe they just stop talking to you, or maybe you get, kicked out of the text chain.
Yeah.
And, that is the threat, right? Like, oh gosh, well, historically it's been, well, I better behave so I don't get kicked out.
Right.
But really, what real love is, well, I want to do the right thing because I love all these other people, right? And they want to do the right thing. And then, okay,
Mm-hmm.
well, we've made a mistake. Well, what do we do with those mistakes if we're not going to kick people out anymore?
Right.
Because, there is justice on the other side
Yeah.
of that,
No,
right?
there are
It's like,
consequences for actions, and we don't live in a consequence-free world. And I know sometimes that's where people can get hung up on the kind of restorative practices piece. They think it's absence of consequences, and that's not what we're trying to promote here. But I'm going to let you go ahead and talk.
but no, I think that piece is so huge, right? It's like, you actually can't love without justice. There is no
Right.
love without justice. There is no community without standards. And we
Right.
certainly don't want our kids to think, well, they can do whatever and they'll be automatically forgiven. That's just not how anything works.
Right.
And so, yes, there is that. All right, well, let's say you do say something horrible, or you did make a comment, or you did, drop the ball. Instead of kicking you out, we help you, and we scaffold either the child or the adult through making amends,
Right.
making it right. You know, I laugh. One of the things that my kids learned really early on was apologies in our house start with eye contact. Like you have to go back and look at the person, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that connection piece is so important. You have to
Absolutely.
use the word I am sorry. Because so many times they're like, sorry, you're mad.
Sorry you did that.
Right. That's not an apology. We're just sorry. Right.
Yeah.
Like that's not an apology. So I feel like
Right.
restorative discipline is like you bring the person back, which is actually harder. My
Yeah,
kids
it
would
is.
rather me send them to their room where they can just pout and feel like justifiably hurt
Yep.
versus acknowledging that they did wrong. It takes such strength to acknowledge you did wrong. It's harder. And
Mm-hmm.
so, yes, there's a consequence always. Maybe it's a suspension, maybe it's a timeout, maybe it's you have to clean the dishes for a month, whatever. But then there's also this extra step of restoration.
Exactly.
I am sorry I messed up. Will you please forgive me? I acknowledge that my actions have consequences and we might not be in a good place. It might take me a while to earn your trust back, right?
Yes.
What can I do to make it up to you? Those elements of that apology and the actions of restoration
Mm-hmm.
I think are a piece that have always been missing, right? We sort of think like, oh, the kid got suspended, or oh, they went to timeout, or oh, they're grounded, and now they've learned. Like, no, all they now know is that they need to be more sneaky,
Yep.
right? Or don't get caught.
Mm-hmm.
Versus, okay, if I'm going to mess up, people accept that. I'm going to have consequences for that. That's life. And it's okay. I'm going to be able to come back into the community and be restored. That's powerful.
That is powerful, and I love the fact that you said being come back into the community and being restored, because I think sometimes that's a piece that's missing. We do the discipline. We say we do the discipline. We check the box, and then there's just kind of all right. Everyone's kind of going on with their lives, but we don't think about kind of on the back end what's important for that student to feel like they're still a part of the community, still feel like that they're not going to be judged by the mistake that they made. And so, how do you do that? Take the time to do that. Because that's the other thing. People are like, oh, we've got so many things to do. I've got to move on to the next thing. They don't take the time to actually kind of talk about that piece and help the student make sure that they feel like they are a good standing member of the community again. And that's a really important piece for kids.
It's so important, and it's not just important for kids, it's also important for parents, right? If I
Yes.
think about, okay, I'm a parent. Let's say my child, you know, I'm trying to think of like what are the bad things kids do these days. Like, maybe my child, wrote a mean thing on a text thread and
Hmm.
got suspended because they did that, right? Not only is my child like socially humiliated and potentially socially ostracized, right? But also, I as a parent am because I'm being judged by all those other parents and all those teachers and all those families, or I think I am. And I don't have a way back in,
Yeah.
right? And so, and I wonder if my child has a way back in. And so I think if restorative practice done really right doesn't just restore the child when it's a big thing, right?
Yes.
It also restores the family, right? And it makes sure that all the parties involved have a chance to feel connected and have their say and know that justice is done and love is the end. And
Yeah.
I think that could help a lot with retention, right? If a family feels like, look, we're going to work so hard that even when you mess up, we're going to make sure you feel like you belong. Gosh, that is love embodied right
It
there. Am
is.
I going to stay
And
at a school that does that? Oh, yes, I am.
absolutely, you're anchored. It's meaningful. You're connected, and so absolutely. And I honestly, I hadn't thought about that parent piece in that way. And I love, not only making that connection with the student, but for circling back to the parents. How are you guys doing? How are you feeling? Like we are. Still in the business of taking care of your child here. Your child still matters and belongs and is seen here as a whole person, and we're in this work together. And I think that could be really powerful for a parent to hear.
Oh my gosh. I mean, if I think about, gosh, if my child went through something like that, I'm also going through it.
Yeah.
I've been hurt by my child's actions. And I might not have, I'm lucky I have people like you I talk to all the time. So I learn about this stuff. So when my child messes up, we do a lot of restorative practice at home, but there are a lot of parents who don't know how. So how incredible if the school also helped the child and the parent restore as part of that learning
Absolutely. As a part
process.
of that process. Yeah. And so great segue into my next question and thinking about being restorative at home. Because I think, takes a community, right? It takes a village. And so how can parents bring restorative practices into the home? And what does that look like in everyday family life?
Oh gosh, that's so good, Bridget. I think you know, I think it looks a lot like both parents and kids apologizing a lot. I laugh. I'm like, I actually probably apologize more to my kids than they apologize to me, for better or worse. But even just the other day, my kids were fighting. I have three kids, and they were
Hmm.
fighting, and I do not like it when they fight. And so I lost my temper and I hollered at them. And yes, they should not have been fighting. And yes, they did have to apologize to each other. And yes, they apologized to me. But I also apologized to them. And I said, yes, it's not okay for you to do this. And I should not have responded the way I did. I wish I had responded differently.
Yeah.
I'm really sorry. Nobody should treat you like that, least of all your mother. Will you please forgive me? And my kid, it's funny, kids are so forgiving.
They are.
There has not been one time when I've asked my child to forgive me that they've been like, nope. you know, so I think there's kind of that posture of humility that yes, I'm the parent and yes, I have power, but as I go, so my kids go.
Absolutely.
So if I can be a person who values restoration and will make amends and acknowledge when I've done wrong, then so will my kids. And
Yep.
so I think that's really important.
Yep, modeling that behavior is super important. And so let's get practical a little bit as we think about, coming to a close here. I love this conversation, by the way. But what's one practical thing a parent could do this week and one thing an educator could do this week to move the needle on belonging for the kids
Mm.
in their lives?
So I think about sort of a framework that I use a lot with parents and teachers. I call it the strong and kind adult in the room, but it's basically you start with your values, you
Mm-hmm.
think about your social emotional intelligence, then you look at your perspectives, and then you think about the right tools. And so if we start kind of, all right, the value that we're really focusing on right now is belonging. Okay, then
Yes.
what perspective do I have around that? I think a lot of times for teachers, sometimes we just accept that some kids are going to be left out, or we just accept that that kid is difficult, or we just accept that that kid is going to put his head down on the desk and not engage in class.
Right.
And it's easier to accept that sometimes. But I think if we take that perspective shift as a teacher and say, okay, well, wait a second, what am I assuming about this kid? And what does that child need
Mm-hmm.
in order to feel like they belong? And to take that frame and say, okay, well, belonging is going to be important for that child to learn. So what tools do I need to use to help that child feel like they belong? Maybe one really practical thing I love doing as an educator is I had for every class, I did assign seats every day, but I mixed them up every day. So I had little note cards with the kids' names on them. And as I walked into class, the first thing I do was mixed up the cards and I randomly put them on the desks. So
Mm-hmm.
every day they had to sit next to someone new and they couldn't have cliques. And what was so cool was by the end of we started in mid-August, and by the end of September, they knew everybody, they had talked to everybody, and they also knew that they were safe with everybody, right? So that's just one little hack that I found that really created belonging in a fun way. In terms of for parents, when you think about, okay, well, I want my child to belong,
Mm-hmm.
um, we can't make them belong with friends, and we can't make them belong at school. You could try, but it will actually make them not belong.
Right.
So I think for parents, if the value is belonging and you think about your own kind of social emotional intelligence around that, and then maybe your perspective around belonging at home, it's like, well, what does it really look like for my child to belong at home? And then a real practical tool on that. This is one of my favorite tools that I recommend for parents is to do a family meeting every week. And we do a family meeting where we start with our family motto, and then we each give compliments to each other.
Oh.
And then we tackle an issue that maybe somebody has put on the agenda. Like, hey, for example, I put on the agenda, it's bothering me that y'all are leaving your stuff all on the stairs and not taking it up. So please do that. And then we close with family fun. And what is so cool is that is the compliments piece is such a neat way for my kids to feel like they belong and that they matter. And that when they put something on the family agenda, it's going to get addressed. And then we're going to have fun together. That's such a practical tool that builds belonging at home, which is really parents where you only have influence.
Yeah, well, yeah. Pretty much, right? So one of the last things I wanted to talk about before we wrapped up is going back to your name of your company, BowBend, because there's something there that I think is important. You talked about parents bending for their children, but sometimes I feel like now parents are breaking. And so, what does healthy bending look like to you? And how do you know if, like, wait, maybe I've bent too far? Like, can we help parents kind of think about that before we close today?
Yes. And I think that's such a great point because a lot of parents are burning out, and it's because they're doing too much for their kids and they're taking on
Mm-hmm.
responsibilities that are not theirs. And
Right.
so that's why I think about, again, my strong and kind framework. It's just this idea, okay, what is my role as a parent? Your role as a parent, we kind of start with that long-term vision. Okay, well, for example, let's say a lot of ways parents burn out is they deeply invest and take responsibility for their children's mistakes. And that is a quick way to burn out, right? But if
Yes.
my long term vision as a parent is to raise a child who's independent and capable, can live on their own, contribute to society wisely, be a good person, all that, it doesn't matter if they get a 75 on their math test. What matters is how I respond to it.
Right.
Right. And so I think, at the easiest thing that parents can do is to not forget to keep your eye off of the right now and keep it on the future. What are
Mm,
the qualities you are trying to establish in your child? Because if you keep your eye on the right now, you are going to be running around trying to please everybody, trying to make your child happy, trying to make them shiny and perfect and never make a mistake. And then you're going to take on too much, and that's going to burn you out and that's going to break you because that's not your job. But your job is to make sure that you are a strong and kind adult in your child's life, that you point them towards that long term vision, and then you support them in getting there. And so, how you respond to their mistakes will change because
yes.
their mistakes aren't a reflection on you as a parent, they're an opportunity for you to parent. And that
Mm.
relieves some of that pressure. So, start with that long term vision, start with your character, start with your faith, start with your values, and then go from there.
I love that. That's great. And so, for someone who's just discovering BowBend, where's the best place for them to start, and how can people connect with you and your work?
Awesome. Thank you, Bridget. I have a website, bowbendconsulting.com. They can also find me on Instagram. I post parenting tips at EPD Williams. And then I also post stuff for schools on Instagram as well at bowbend_consulting. They can also email me, Peyten Williams at bowbendconsulting.com.
Awesome. Peyton, thank you so much for being here today. This conversation about raising children who truly know they belong and what it looks like when parents and educators work together to make that happen is work that every person at this table needs to be thinking about. And I'm so grateful you brought your heart and expertise to this conversation today.
Bridget, thank you for having me. It's been a blast.
Absolutely. And so, folks, if you want to learn more about Peyton's work, head over to BowBend Consulting and explore her workshops for parents, schools, and communities. We'll include Peyton's links in today's website and show notes, and so you can find them there. And hey, if you're not already following us on Instagram and TikTok, come find us. Search for the Dinged Roundtable on both platforms for leadership insights, community building resources, and conversations that matter to student life professionals. We'd love to see you there. If you're enjoying the table, don't forget to subscribe, share it with a friend, or leave us a review. It really helps more people find us. And again, thanks for pulling up a chair at the table today. I hope this conversation gave you something to think about, or maybe even something to try out in your own community. And as always, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and we'll see you next time at the table.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Table Podcast Series. Is your student life program delivering on your mission? Our new K-12 student life assessment moves you beyond anecdotes to evidence-based decisions. Through comprehensive stakeholder surveys and expert analysis, you'll get concrete insights across 8 essential dimensions of student life, from culture and wellness to staff effectiveness and resource allocation. We're seeking founding partner schools to be the first to experience this transformative assessment process and help shape the future of student life evaluation. Today's episode was hosted by Bridget Johnson in conversation with Peyten Williams, produced and edited by Andrick Sigmund and music by PremiumBeat.com. For any questions, contact information can be found in the episode description. And, as always, thanks again for listening.